This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with remarkable folks who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and with an astounding career spanning over 30 years, my guest this week, Mike Tollin, has brought us some of the most gripping and inspirational sports stories ever told. As executive producer of the Emmy Award-winning documentary series The Last Dance, Michael and his team gave us a riveting inside look at the Chicago Bulls dynasty and basketball legend Michael Jordan. Mike has consistently used sports as a lens for exploring the human spirit, and his imprint can be felt across numerous influential films and television shows over the past 3 decades. Today, Mike continues to push creative boundaries as the co-founder of SlamBall. Dubbed the UFC of team sports, SlamBall blends the best elements of basketball, football, and hockey with the high-flying energy of a video game. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you.
So, Mike, you are a showbiz guy. And
Wow.
I dabbled, I made a short film, and I know how hard show business is, but I don't think there's anything harder than launching a new sports league. Are you a glutton for punishment? What is wrong with you, Mike? Because what you were doing was already hard enough. This is almost insurmountable to pull this off.
Well, I'm struggling with you're a showbiz guy, okay? Like it's something that, that I run away from, but like, okay, I guess I've been called worse, but
Yeah.
I prefer to consider myself a Philly guy. Okay. And as a Philly guy, I go way back suffering with all of our teams through many disappointing seasons. But of late, there's been a little bit of a buzz going, right? We got this new perspective that Philly fans are no longer the worst fans in all sports, but are the best fans in all sports by virtue of how we treated Trey Turner, standing ovations, how we made things difficult for the opposing teams in the World Series. We got the Eagles going. The Sixers thing is, we're still struggling a little bit with the James Harden.
Let's skip over that. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I've kind of made my business focused on sports. It is, in Hollywood, they kind of want you to have a lane. And I guess that's my lane, although I'm always sort of, bursting at the seams and trying to get out and occasionally doing shows with no scoreboards, no bats, no balls, and so forth. Creating a sport, that's a whole other animal. Live sports, no second chances, no rewrites, no reshoots, no fixing it in post. We just finished what I like to call our Vegas residency. Adele had hers and SlamBall had its. But, all thanks to a great guy, dear friend and partner for 20-some years, Mason Gordon, who once upon a time in the previous century presented me with a napkin with a primitive drawing on it with what looked like the outline of a basketball court with these rectangles sketched into the drawing, which represented where trampolines would be embedded into the court. And he said, it's a new sport that I dreamed up that combines the best of basketball with the best of football, with the best of video games, and it's called SlamBall. And off we went.
And now SlamBall does have a bit of an interesting history because, like you mentioned, a couple decades ago, your bud came up with it, and then all of a sudden, poof, it went away. And now, rising from the ashes like the phoenix, here comes SlamBall raising $11 million and getting into bed with ESPN and such. How did that happen? How did that? And again, you're a showbiz guy. Everyone loves the second act. How did this second act happen with SlamBall?
Well, Joe, it sounds like you've done your homework. Yes, in fact, we set out to raise 10 million and we got 11. We couldn't turn away that last million. It's nice to be able to say we oversubscribed. And there are people like David Blitzer and Michael Rubin and David Edelman. That's the Philly contingent. Gary Vaynerchuk, Blake Griffin, Roger Ehrenberg, who's the lead investor. It was sort of an affirmation that maybe the world was ready for SlamBall. To go back to that ancient history that we both referred to, it started in the early aughts, 01, 02, 03, we're on Spike TV. We went to China, we created SlamBall China. We came back with IMG as a partner in 08, but it's been a solid 15 years of no SlamBall, at least on U.S. soil. Believe it or not, we had courts embedded in China and intramural and intercollegiate battles going on in China, centered in, ready for this, Wuhan.
Wow.
So the epicenter of SlamBall was also the epicenter, as we now know, of the pandemic. And so SlamBall was shut down in China and all over the world. But at the same time that people could no longer go to SlamBall games, they found it on social media. And without any of our doing, like I'd love to take credit for, sort of generating this buzz, but in fact, without us even paying attention, there was a hashtag bring back SlamBall. And before we knew it, there were literally hundreds of millions. I think we're up to about 500 million views. Hashtag bring back SlamBall. So we heard the clamor, we heard the groundswell. Mason and I reconnected, and we sort of, we put the line in the water. And when, really esteemed investors are taking a nibble, when media companies are clamoring to be a part of it, when Legends, which is one of the biggest, sponsorship and hospitality organizations, came in and actually said, we don't want to just sell your sponsorships, but actually we want to be an equity partner, as they now are. So just all these things were happening, and we said, let's bring it back. So, once the investment was secured, the next step was the media deal. I mean, let's face it, the only thing that is creating a water cooler culture now, right, is live sports, right? If you're, most people are watching streaming and everything is time shifted, but the one thing you can't time shift is live sports. So when people say, how's it going to be different, or why now? My answer is, it was a TV show. I mean, it was entertaining and it was based on a sport, but it was packaged, and, we'd cut things out and we'd add things and we'd composite things and, feature. But like we said, let's bring back a sport that's going to be broadcast live and that you can actually bet on. And sure enough, I think we set a record for the shortest amount of time for U.S. integrity to actually approve the sport and allow us to get live betting lines. And sure enough, Circa, which has the biggest sports book in Vegas, is very aggressively, proactively setting lines on SlamBall. So much so that, like, when we had the finals last week, we saw the line move 2 points in the hour leading up to the game because people were putting money on the undefeated Mob, and the line went from minus 5.5 points to minus 7.5. So, it was a Herculean task. On one level, we had to recruit players, which was a global effort. And on the other level, we had to figure out our media partner. And it was a very competitive environment. I have to say that, pretty much everybody you would imagine, and a couple that you wouldn't have expected to jump in, were interested in making us offers. And ultimately, we went with the worldwide leader. Jimmy Pitaro is I think, a very forward-thinking leader. And he's not only, the guy who commands the biggest rights, but he's also taking shots on secondary and tertiary sports, right? So he said, let's give it a shot. And we made a 2-year deal for something like 60 hours of live programming, the summer of 23 and the summer of 24. And so we've had conversations in the week that has been since the finals, like, what do we do between now and next summer to keep SlamBall alive in the hearts and minds of our audience, to seed the territory, to increase fan engagement, to increase the level of play, to sharpen the broadcast, all the things that we need to do to make this thing have staying power.
Wow. And so for a professional sport to survive in this day and age, you need 3 things. As I call it, like the sports stool. You need a compelling sport, you need the television, and you need the gambling. Without those 3 things, none of it works. Are you shocked about the third part, the gambling part? Because I know you'd already done SlamBall with television, and this game it created was pretty compelling. But the idea of gambling, because I know back in the early 2000s, the word gambling was very dark. It was very seedy. And now all of a sudden, you have major partnerships. A couple weeks ago, Disney, of all people, signed a giant gambling deal with Penn. As someone who's been in the weeds doing this turn in terms of the acceptance of gambling, can you describe like how unbelievable it's become in the last 10, 20 years?
Well, I can try. I can give you my perspective, which was having grown up the son of an inveterate gambler. It's really funny because, as I said, Philly teams in my youth didn't win much. And we had this thing, my brother and I, Dad, if you're betting against the Eagles, we're not watching the game with you. Sometimes he would sneak it and pretend, and then we'd get a sense because he would snub out his cigarette with a certain kind of demeanor that made us realize he was upset that the Eagles scored a touchdown or something. I'm not really a bettor myself, but I learned the language. I learned the level of fan engagement that it engendered, okay? And I remember what to me was the seminal turning point when Adam Silver said, we're going to investigate. We're going to look into this. Look, it's happening all over the world. Obviously, we have to be careful. Obviously, there's all kinds of concerns about the integrity of the sport. And the NFL, I think, is maybe gone a little bit overboard in a little bit draconian in its rules. I think the problem is the players really don't know what they can and can't do. But Adam, not surprisingly, was the progressive commissioner who got out ahead of the conversation. Look, it's all about fan engagement, right? And let's be honest, at this point with SlamBall, most of the audience doesn't know the players, isn't familiar with the mob versus the rumble versus the slasher versus the ozone. And there are 8 teams and there are 56 players, and it's going to take a minute. So gambling just accelerates the process to be able to go and actually have a rooting interest. This isn't a parallel that I really love because it wasn't really a sport that I understood, and it wasn't. We have higher aspirations for SlamBall. But when I was a kid, we'd go to Miami during Christmas vacation from Philadelphia, and we'd bet on highlight.
Right? Sure.
And the games were short, and so after every 20 minutes, you could take your losing tickets and tear them up and go bet on the next game. So SlamBall games are short. They're about between 30 and 40 minutes, and in a 2-hour live program, live for the broadcast and live for the in-arena fans, you got 3 games. So you can, bet 3 times, or, now there's live betting. So increasingly people are going to, bet every minute on something and hedge their bets or double down on their bets. So I get it. And I don't think it compromises the integrity. I just think it makes you lean in. It's funny. It's not the amount, my thing with betting is I'll never bet on a game where I have a rooting interest, because it's kind of like the separation of church and state. My teams are the church and betting is the state. But if I'm going to a Super Bowl where I don't really have a dog in the fight, I'll make a bet just so I care. And it's never about the money. It's just about being right. I think most bettors will tell you it's more about, being able to say I made the right call. So I get it. We've embraced it. And I think it's actually a big part of our growth, honestly.
That's awesome. And I always thought they were obviously hypocritical. Like the NFL for years were sort of just wanted to distance themselves from wagers and talk about gambling. But I mean, deep down, and you notice, Mike, they knew that people weren't watching a Bengals-Jaguars game on a Sunday afternoon because they were interested in the Jaguars. There was money. Like, they knew this, but I think they were just waiting for the proper time, like the Adam Silvers of the world, to step forward and be like, okay, let's make this legitimate. And so it's great that you guys are smart enough to realize, hey, listen, this is going to happen whether you decide to team up with these folks or not. It's going to happen. So just do it.
Let's embrace it. Why fight it? Look, there's a great writer named Roger Angel who passed away recently. He wrote the most elegant and eloquent sports writing. Gary Smith and Roger Angel, in my mind, the 2 pillars. And Roger wrote a book that was just a compendium of his New Yorker stories. And the one that I always remember was after the 6th game of the 1975 World Series, that incredible Red Sox series. And Carlton Fisk hit the foul pole in the 12th inning and won the game 7-6. And he talked about the business of caring, right? And how one haphazard flight of a distant ball sends one group of people dancing wildly in the streets and the other people grieving and crying their eyes out. Like, what's that about? So that's what sports is. It's the business of caring. So some people said to me, okay, so we're watching the game and you got a problem, because we had one team called the Mob that went 18-0, and every one of their victories was by double figures. So a bettor, this is where the line went from 5.5 to 7.5, right? And I said, well, here's the thing, if you're starting a legitimate sport, you can't fix that, right? You just have to. That's where you set the line at a right place. So even though the Mob is an overwhelming favorite, if you set the line right, you're still going down to the wire that it's going to hinge on that last shot. So that was the thing when you introduced this whole conversation about, like, careful what you wish for, the gargantuan task that is creating a sport. There's so many uncontrollable things, and I'm so used to, as a filmmaker, having the opportunity to fix it in post and improve and overcome the imperfections. But there's something beautiful, on the other hand, about just letting the chips fall And when it's over, you just walk away and, head to the bar for a cocktail instead of into the edit room. So yeah, we feel like there was a coach named Brandon Kirsch, and he's an old school SlamBall coach who maybe is just a little ahead of the curve, and he drafted really well, and he got probably 3 of the best 5 players. And there's a guy named Gage Smith who was the ultimate stopper. They were just better. And so now it's up to the others to catch up. What we've seen is a real influx of talent wanting to play SlamBall. These are the guys that were D1, primarily football or basketball players who just missed. Let's face it, in basketball, there are only 2 rounds. They're only drafting 60 guys, and there's 1,000 kids who've been playing this sport their whole lives, dreaming of being in the league. And these guys come to SlamBall so hungry, this is their shot. And so, we get these guys coming up and thanking us for the opportunity to play the sport, and there's a physicality to it. So, as my partner Mason likes to say, the collision of the cultures, basketball and football, the physicality of football and the elevation of basketball. So now we're getting more and more guys, and we've said from the beginning, we're not gonna rely on celebrity in the beginning. Mason likes to say we're gonna create our own Conor McGregors the way the UFC did it. We'll see. Along the way, if there are the right kind of athletes who are in the league and are coming not to take advantage of their celebrity, but because they're attracted to the game and the specifics of the athleticism that it entails. And I always think of Russell Westbrook, when he's done with his $43 million a year NBA career, we might have a spot for him.
That's awesome. It's so funny. You took the words out of my mouth, because I think the final step that any league needs to break through, especially to the mainstream, is having that face of the league.
Yeah.
The NBA had the Jordans and Magics. I mean, Jerry West is the logo. NFL had Johnny Unitas and Joe Namath. And I felt like for professional soccer here in the States, we've needed that for decades. Yeah. And now Leo Messi comes on over. Yeah. And now all of a sudden he's going to get. What do you think about that in terms of, it sounds like you're patient, but developing that face of the league, that person who becomes sort of the, whether the kids know it and the grandma knows the person. How important do you think that is for the development?
It's something we talk about all the time, but I just kind of put my cards on the table with one specific. We think when people say, well, what is it that separates SlamBall players from each of those 2 sports? And I say fierce, fearless, ferocious. So it would have been Allen Iverson, Philly guy that I am. He was the guy who embodied all of that. And now it's Russ. I mean, he's sort of getting to the end of the NBA career, but there's nobody that plays harder. I just think seeing him hitting somebody in the open court and then going up, there are a lot of guys in both sports. But there's a couple of different ways to skin that cat. For instance, like the way Beckham came to MLS, right? As an owner, after he played, we had Marshawn Lynch doing color commentary for us. And since that time, I don't think I'm violating any confidence. He has come back to us to say, I want to be a part of this league. I don't just want to be an announcer. I'd like to talk about ownership, having a position in the league.
Cool.
Okay, so that's another way to go, is to take guys like Marshawn Lynch, friends of SlamBall. I would include Shaquille and a number of other big names that have played the sport and are, guys who can aggregate social media audiences and give us a certain level of credibility and visibility. At this point, everything's on the table. There are people talking to us about franchises. There are people talking to us about hosting tournaments. There are people from casinos saying, bring SlamBall to X casino. I didn't realize there are, dozens of casinos in the States these days, and a lot of them have arenas where you could actually stage an event. So it's all on the table. As I said, we have a commitment with ESPN for next summer, and now we have 12 months to figure out how best to, like I said, keep this thing in the hearts and minds.
And how do you develop the next generation? I know you talked about acquiring players from other sports, that being an obvious way, but how do you sort of can kids build a SlamBall in their backyard? How do we talk about, introducing younger folks to becoming first gen, 1.0 SlamBall players, as opposed to being migrating over from another sport?
Joe, you're asking all the good questions. We might need you in our brainstorming sessions. Something we talk about all the time. When I was growing up in Philly, the NHL expanded from, I think, 6 original franchises to double that. The Flyers came to town, and all of a sudden, we had to play hockey. So bake sales and car washes and, every little way we could raise enough money to build one hockey arena in our town. And you'd literally wait, nowadays there wasn't social media then or the internet then, but you'd get on the phone and you'd try to book an hour and they'd say, well, we only have 3 a.m. available. And you say, I'll take it. Right. So 24/7, we were signing up to play hockey, to learn how to skate and a whole different sport. But playing it really is alongside betting, another way to increase fan engagement. So what we're talking about now is putting SlamBall courts in certain destinations. I actually have a relationship with something called Future Legends, which is a really cool youth sports complex in Fort Collins, Colorado, an hour north of Denver. We have a giant bubble, and we're discussing how and when to put a SlamBall court in there. So it's permanent. And so the vision is that, number one, we could have guys come try out. Number two, we could have youth sports clinics, so we could teach kids how to jump on this, jump. I mean, the good thing that's happened is that trampoline parks have gotten very popular, as you know, and a lot of times they just put a hoop up. And it's not SlamBall, but it's at least creating a language where trampolines are part of, getting to dunk on a 10-foot rim. All these YouTubers, all these influencers want to come and try it out and then show themselves to their audiences of millions and millions of followers that, hey, look at me, doing these crazy moves. So we're talking to Future Legends. We're talking to some other locations, trying to put SlamBall courts in a bunch of regions where we can grow the game, where we can experiment, where coaches and strategists and players and kids and, everybody can come and create these SlamBall communities.
That's awesome. Speaking of a community, I feel like this screams like an intramural sport at a university.
Sure.
Yes. I mean, it just, especially the fact that it's, as long as you have the capabilities to have the trampoline and the basket, it's such a low barrier of entry because everyone knows what it's like to jump around on a trampoline and everyone knows what it's like to play basketball. So obviously, whether they're good at it is a different thing. But in terms of being able to play it, especially when you're younger, I mean, I'm just thinking of the way pickleball has exploded in colleges over the last decade. I remember years ago, my mother moved to the Villages in Florida, a big retirement community, and she was talking to me about pickleball in 2000, and I'm like, pickle what? And now Tom Brady owns a team in a pickleball league. So it's crazy how you see that sport sort of explode because of this intramural activity that's happening at the college level. Is that something that you've had discussions about as well?
That's what you're describing is what happened in China before the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
They were building, I believe there were a dozen courts that were built in different communities. As I said, Wuhan, unfortunately, was kind of the mecca. And there were intramural and intercollegiate, and I don't know exactly the shape of it. But yes, that was happening on that level. And that's definitely, in the blueprint. Again, it's I'm a guy who likes to crawl before I walk and walk before I run. It's not really when, it's if and how. We want to make sure we're careful. We're considering all the options, bringing in as many great ideas as possible. And Joe, you're hitting on a lot of them. I actually have talked to women's sports executives about women's SlamBall. Why not?
Yeah.
Somebody said to me, somebody who actually was a part of the WNBA for many years, one of the things that maybe limits certain people's enjoyment, appreciation of WNBA is not seeing that elevation. Very few women have been able to dunk. Well, in SlamBall, they'll all dunk, right? So, look, these are all these things are on the table. It's really exciting. Youth, women, all parts of our population. When you talk about pickleball, obviously I see it, and I'm somewhat envious of the accelerated growth. But then I go, it's a great participatory sport, but is it as good a spectator sport? I mean, frankly, we feel like our 7 seconds of highlights are better than theirs. So
yeah, I think you got a little more action in SlamBall than pickleball. Yes, I think we can all agree on that. And talk about this restraint, because I feel like, this is a business podcast, so I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, especially tech, and remember the tech ethos was move fast and break shit. So how do you restrain yourself? I mean, you get the $11 million, you get the TV deal, you get the gambling. What part of your being is like stopping you from like, yes, everybody come in, I'll take all your money, I'll take all your offers. Like, where's this all coming from?
Wow, that's a great question. That's like a real opportunity for me to reflect. And I've been at this for so long, Joe. Maybe that's a part of it. I mean, Hank Aaron's, I hate to drop a name, but one of the things I'm proudest of, and one of those things, that I, was really embodies so many values and why I'm in the filmmaking world. We did this documentary called Chasing the Dream, and it was celebrated on a lot of levels, but more than ratings and awards, we started a foundation called the Chasing the Dream Foundation, and we've given away tens of millions of dollars to kids to help them chase their own dreams outside of sports in whatever endeavor they were trying to pursue. And so I got very friendly with Henry, and he said to me, Mike, you got to be the tortoise, not the hare. Okay, so to a certain extent, that explains. I'd rather just keep moving forward in the right direction than rush to something and then find out I got to backtrack and, retrace my steps. So, yeah, we'll get there.
Let's talk about your. I mean, I know you like me calling you showbiz guy earlier, but I want to talk a little bit about your showbiz guy, because you've been responsible for a lot of, and you mentioned as well that you were put in this sort of like this bucket of the sports movie TV guy, but you've done so many different things, and I know a lot of them just don't have the legacy that they should. I think The Bronx is Burning is probably one of the greatest achievements in terms of telling a story through sports. And I'm a Mets fan, Mike. So I'm coming from a place of envy here, because like the Mets aren't going to get a mini series.
Well, they did.
Soon.
Well, they did. They had their 30 for 30.
Yeah, but nothing like it's all about people boozing and doing coke while playing baseball. But like the Yankees is about an era of greatness. So what were your memories of that, talking about like the heyday of the George Steinbrenner, Reggie Jackson Yankees?
Well, as you know, it was scripted, okay? So this wasn't like doing The Last Dance or doing The Redeem Team or doing Hank Aaron or any of the documentaries we've done. This was about casting 3 guys to play George, Billy, and Reggie, right? So Oliver Platt is George Steinbrenner. That works. Now Oliver Platt's back on The Bear and getting nominated for an Emmy. Yeah. John Turturro, man, like he was so focused on the ears. If you remember, John had these prosthetic ears, right? And it was like we saw them, and it was the day before the shoot, and we're like, oh man, they're a little too big. But like John's not going to do this role without the ears, and we can't. It's either all or nothing. And we're just like, okay, let's just go with it. And hopefully people aren't fixated on the ears. And then there was a guy who was a little less well known, Daniel Shinjata, who played Reggie. He was a great actor. So that was the threesome that, sort of made up the core. It was a lot of fun. There was a executive at ESPN named Ron Semio who became like a producing partner. We used a lot of footage. So it's something that I love to do, which is to straddle the line between documentary and scripted filmmaking. There was, we had Howard Cosell and Keith Jackson doing the call. And I remember, there was a book, The Bronx is Burning, which we adapted for the series. And there was actually a call where Howard Cosell said, you could see the flames out there over the, the left field walls, Yankee Stadium, the Bronx is burning. That's where it came from. So that was the last, this is a little story from my life in working with ESPN. So the Bronx is Burning was done. We got a lot of acclaim, and we were nominated for a bunch of things and won some awards and all. And I remember John Skipper coming in as the new head of ESPN saying, I got good news and bad news. Okay, give me the good news first. He said, well, I think it's great. I think it's maybe the best scripted thing that ESPN has done. Okay, what's the bad? It's the last one we'll ever do. On to 30 for 30, and I think probably the first 30 films, their composite budget was not that much different than making The Bronx is Burning. Ultimately, the ESPN audiences are, they can get that elsewhere, right? Especially now where there's so many, how many Ted Lassos and Winning Time, there's just so many scripted sports stories. So I think when ESPN viewers tune in, they're looking for games. They're looking for something they can bet on, something they can care about.
That's awesome. And the last showbiz / sports question. One of the fascinating things about sports, whether it's films or TV shows, if you look at like the nuts and bolts of box office, they're never super high grossing movies. I can't even remember. Like I remember Rocky. The Rocky 4 was the highest grossing Rocky movie, and it was like $100 million. Yet Hollywood continues for generations to make sport movies, even though they don't have this blockbuster appeal. Can you take me behind the scenes as to why? I mean, obviously, maybe the budgets have something to do with it, but why does Hollywood continue, and you as well, continue to make sports stories into film and TV?
Well, first of all, we should mention The Blind Side just because it's in the news right now.
Oh yeah, sure. That was a big hit.
Probably
Yep.
that was $300 million. So that was a gigantic blockbuster hit. Sorry to see the family squabbles now. Dirty laundry. Hate to see it. But I just think there's something universal about sports. You know, you can go to any town, you get in a cab and you say, who's your favorite team and how they doing? You know the stakes. You know who you're rooting for. There's a scoreboard. There's winners. There's losers, right? You know, like we made Varsity Blues. Like, who cares about the West Canaan Coyotes? Well, you do, because, you know, you get caught up in, you know, Vanderbeek and Paul Walker and John Voight and these guys, and they're your team and you're rooting for them. It's the community. You know, community is that word I always come back to. Ultimately, that's why, even living 3,000 miles away, I am a Philly fan. I have my buddies from grade school and from high school and college and summer camp, and like that's what keeps us together. So I think it's just a universal language, and it's going to live forever. I'm grateful for that.
Awesome. So there's Mike Tollin. He has got SlamBall, and he's slowing down, but he's going to explode any second now. So, Mike, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Nice talking to you, Joe. I appreciate it too.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That way you'll get new episodes as soon as they're available. And if you have a spare moment, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review, which would help other exceptional folks like you discover the show. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.